I know what you're all thinking. This priest has lost his mind reading this passage with all these children here on the occasion of this baptism. I got to tell you, I wish I had a choice, but I don't. In the Episcopal Church, our readings come pre-assigned. That's to protect you so that I don't preach about the same thing every week. And yet this one is painfully obvious. I really thought I was going to start laughing at one point. It's painfully obvious that it's a strange choice for a gospel lesson, don't you think? And possibly PG-13? So let's take a step back, and I want you to follow me on a little journey to one of the places I call home, North Carolina. There are two certain churches in western North Carolina, in Ashe County. One is called St. Mary's, the other is called Holy Trinity Episcopal, and together they are known collectively as the Churches of the Frescoes. These two churches are a lot like Grace New Lenox, with our unique quilts and banners. Wait, I'm pointing to the wrong one. There we go, it's right there. I'm pointing to the one that's going to be here soon, and I'm so excited about it. You quilters out there. And the two churches of the Frescoes in rural North Carolina contain frescoes, of course, which are the art that's done by plaster on walls with different color plaster. And this is what Da Vinci used to make his famous The Last Supper. These frescoes in North Carolina were done by an artist named Ben Long in the 1970s. And Ben Long was commissioned to do his own version of The Last Supper at one of the churches, but at the other one, St. Mary's, what he did was he did two single portraits, one of St. Mary, the Virgin Mary, and the other one of John the Baptist, flanking the altar. Now, Mary's, really quickly, was quite controversial because in Ben Long's interpretation, and remember this was the 70s, we weren't quite comfortable with sexuality and, of course, physicality, especially of women at the time. Mary is extremely pregnant. We're talking like 39, 40 weeks pregnant in the portrait. And because, heaven forbid we show Mary with Jesus in her womb. On the flip side of the altar is a very realistic portrait of John the Baptist. He's dirty, he's gritty, he's half naked. He's dressed in the familiar camel's hair. He's got crazy wild hair. He looks every bit the fanatic that's come out of the wilderness eating locusts and wild honey. And in the illustration, which I'll put on our website along with the sermon, he's pointing to his head like this. And it's as if he's indicating he's going to be the one to point the way to Jesus. And it almost subtly is also indicating that he knows what's in store for him and for Jesus. Now, I'm going to quickly get to what happened to this poor fresco. It's still there, trust me. But a few years after it was completed, a woman who was mentally ill broke into the church and ransacked it and took a knife, and she managed to only make one laceration to the frescoes. And the one she did, of course, tragically, was a horizontal line right across John, right at the neck. And her one stroke of the knife made that devastating cut, and it was an eerie, not too ironic reminder of the way, it was all happenstance, but a reminder of the way in which John famously died. And it's immortalized in this story today. It's immortalized in countless paintings and artwork. Painters and creators are so fascinated with this story. It's the second most depicted Christian image after the crucifixion. So, what comes for John, tragically, is described in great detail today. And I can't say enough that Mark's gospel usually wastes no time in trying to get a point across. He has no time to pause or take in any details, and yet that's exactly what he does here. So it must be something incredibly important. But, especially for all of us today, as you heard, there's a few things curiously missing. Where's Jesus? Where's the good news? Where's God's love? This lesson might be subtitled Requiem for a Prophet. You see, in exchange for his good work as the baptizer of Jesus and the one who prepared the way for his cousin to begin his public ministry as Son of God, John instead is arrested for insulting the king. The king is Herod Antipas, the young king of Judea. He's effectively neutralized because of Rome's occupation there. but still plays up all of his kingship. And Herod has taken his brother's wife as his own after killing his brother, which generally is considered in the first century and in the 21st century to be bad. But it's the taking of the wife that is particularly bad, and John publicly calls him out on it. So Herod and his new wife Herodias, and really quickly there is a textual error live and right in front of you in the text, where it's meant to say a different name for the daughter, but a copyist error made a mistake centuries ago, and they kept it in. The daughter is not named Herodias. Tradition calls her Salome. The mother is Herodias. The mother is the evil one. She's heard enough, and she is insisting that Herod imprison John. But notice that Mark takes a lot of sentences to say that Herod really likes John. Nevertheless, John's time has come, and he's going to be executed in a tragic twist of fate. And this does not make Herod a good guy in any stretch of the imagination, but he's duped, he's fooled. And it foreshadows another conflicted punisher, Pontius Pilate. Pilate, too, would be intrigued by his captive and inclined to release him if it weren't for the insisting of others. And likewise, Herod only dispatches of John because of someone else's demands. Now, that does not make them saints, it makes them cowards. And it makes them participants in wrongful deaths. You see, these two stories, the passion of John and the passion of Jesus, go together. For Mark's gospel, it is setting up what is supposed to be happening, the complexity, the politics, the stakes, the same things that will affect Jesus' demise. John's contributions were prior to his own death. He paved the way for Jesus the Messiah. For all of John's existing notoriety as a baptizer and an agent of social justice, speaking out about crimes of government and the institution of religion, he recognized he had to give away all that authority once Jesus came on the scene. As he increases, I must decrease. John was prepared to turn to Christ and follow him. And though John's death ends with tragedy, Jesus' death will be a beginning, the turnaround, and the restoration and the resurrection. In that sense, these scenes are the flip sides of the same coin. So last week I mentioned the cost of discipleship. That's a phrase that rings true throughout Mark's gospel. It means the stakes of being a follower of Jesus are high. In the first century, for the disciples, they must take up their own cross and follow Jesus. They must leave behind families and turn and follow Jesus. And like him, they will mostly die a violent death. For us, thankfully here, stakes aren't so high. But for our forebears, the cost of discipleship was life and death. Turning to Christ was essential, though, from the very beginning. And it remains essential today. It's embedded in our baptismal covenant and in the vows that the sponsors will take on behalf of little Philip today. It's a great wink and nod from the Holy Spirit, it turns out, that on the day of Philip's baptism, the day of a baptism of our own church family at Grace, it'd be the same day we hear about John the Baptist. Now, John embodies a gospel of the oppressed. That's the term I like to call all of the good news of Jesus, a gospel of the oppressed. John sits in a dungeon in shackles, and the oppressor is up above in kingly robes, dancing, looking down, toying with his fate. If I could sum up one theme of this past General Convention of the Episcopal Church, quickly for those who don't know, that's the triennial meeting of the Episcopal Church to decide laws for our church governances. Well, if I could describe what this past week meant to me, it would be the oppressed voices speaking truth to power. In one realm of our General Convention were resolutions to create expansive language options for our existing Eucharistic prayers. which will eventually allow the church flexibility in using gender-neutral terminology for God. In other words, we're going to use the word God more. It will also start to correct the overabundant patriarchal language. So instead of often assuming him for Holy Spirit, we will use interchangeable pronouns. And we may back off on using the term Lord for Jesus more and more. Those are just a few examples. Now, in another realm of convention, the women clergy rose to speak together and pass a resolution that would protect the women clergy and the female lay employees of the church from gender-related oppression, harassment, and would create safer workplaces, something that, believe it or not, still eludes even the church in the Me Too age. And elsewhere at convention, the Diocese of Cuba, which had been exiled for 52 years from the Episcopal Church while it was stuck under Castro's thumb, the Diocese of Cuba was readmitted back into the Episcopal Church unanimously, and it even garnered the addition of another female bishop. So all of these things reminded me that the gospel, which is the good news of Jesus, is really a gospel for the oppressed. The last shall be first, indeed. And all of this is given back to us in a strange sort of way by this quiet, tragic death of John, the epitome of a power dynamic gone terribly wrong. But rest assured, dear John, that the path was paved, the way was made straight for Jesus to take death and transform it to life, to take weakness and transform it into strength, and to take despair and transform it into hope.